Welcome everybody to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call for February 18th. And we're really glad you're here. There's a lot going on and we're hoping that this session will be highly interactive with you. We are really trying to figure out how to make some of the programs that you work with every day or might be working with in the future, that they will be a lot more effective, and your experience from the past and currently will be crucial to all this. Let's just go through the agenda really quickly about what we're going to do, and then we're going to dive right in. So we're going to start out with a couple of highlights, just a mishmash of things that I think we just wanted to alert you to in the housing counseling world. It's really a lot going on, and we'll touch on a couple things to hope you make sure you're on top of it. But we'll spend most of the call on the stimulus bill and how it impacts your work and how it might impact your work in the future. So Elise Cohen, a major voice in housing reform in this country, and has been deeply influential on really progressive work to keep people in their houses and to help increase home ownership, from National Consumer Law Center, will give an overview of the campaign around the stimulus bill and some high points about what's in it. Joseph Sant from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods will talk with us about their view of how to make the homeowners assistance program work more effectively, and what we've learned in the past from the hardest hit funds and other programs. I think this is the kind of stuff that we need to do to shape policy in the future. And then we have three veterans from the Foreclosure Crisis days who are deeply immersed in this. We don't have Lori Gay on the list, both a deeply experienced veteran of the Foreclosure Crisis, who's the head of the NHS of Los Angeles. We have Chris Kramer from Beyond Housing in Missouri, and we have Lot Diaz from Unidos US. And they're going to be like a panel to talk about experience really with NFMC, because we're on the cusp of potentially creating a similar program for housing counseling under the COVID-19 bill, assuming that it passes. So, and we're very interested in your feedback about either of these programs, about how to make them work better, and problems that you got in the field that prevented people from getting it, or from you being able to properly access the programs. Because we want to really give guidance to Treasury, we want to give guidance to NeighborWorks, the best we can do to really learn from the experience of the past. We'll do a quick NHRC membership plug, and thank you so much for everybody renewing. And we just had a flood of renewals at the beginning of the year, and just, you know, we deeply appreciate that a lot. And then our next call will actually be very interesting. It's on student loans. Our friends at Savvy will be with us to talk about the latest updates on this, along with, I hope we're going to have the student debt crisis people on as well. And so it'll be kind of a deep dive of where it is and where we need to go in terms of policy. But it's also will be practical in terms of what you can do for your clients in the current environment. So mark your calendars for March 4th. So let me just jump through a couple things. I'll be really quick. So just I want to say a big thank you on sign-on letters. I know I get these emails saying, oh, we didn't meet the deadline, why didn't you give us more time, sorts of things. And I so appreciate this, but you know, unfortunately, these are really things that turn on a dime. And I do want to say this is very valuable stuff. And I know you all are busy, and stopping and getting the approvals you need to sign on to some of these letters, they have been critical in the policy things, and we'll probably talk a little bit about it, but wanted to give you a big thanks, and apologies for people who weren't able to quite meet the deadline. The deadlines in the last two were unbelievably short, and you know, it's just the nature of the business. So big thanks to everybody. So I had an interesting conversation this week with Teresa Bardwell at RCAC. We're talking about issues, and about the issues that are specific to smaller agencies that have 1, 2, or 3 housing counselors on staff, and how does certification intersect with them. But I think there's also, you know, hiring, and how do we deal with funding issues. So it occurred to us that it would be good to have a conversation with smaller groups and try to just form maybe a bit of a working team that might be able to address this. This is especially important for agencies that are in rural areas, but really it's wherever small agencies are. It's not an area I think that gets a lot of attention. I think our experience is that we will have great access with our friends at HUD right now about trying to be able to pay more attention to some of the particular aspects of our counseling work. And so if you're interested, shoot me an email, Dr. Teresa. Let's see if we can get some ideas flowing about what might be helpful. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to the fact that the HUD appointments we're seeing have been really exciting. So we had David Berenbaum on our call 2 weeks ago. I think we got very good reviews on the call. I think his his enthusiasm and his emphasis on sustainability for housing counseling agencies is really valuable, and we appreciate that. There have been other good appointments. One I just mentioned to you, we haven't had her on the calls, but Alana Mccargo, who used to be at the Urban Institute, is a very important voice, especially on aspects of race and home ownership, both in terms of purchase and in retaining houses. She's sort of a deep thinker in this work. We've posted some of her research in the past on the leaders list, and having her inside HUD will be a really important issue in terms of being able to provide a racial lens on some of the critical issues you work on. So we're excited about that. We're very excited about Marsha Fudge. Some of you from Ohio have already had a working relationship with her. She will be a source of innovation, and there's lots of progress. And there are some very good people have been put in place. So we're very interested in your thoughts on things that HUD can do better in the housing counseling field. We are already raising the issue about why is housing counseling not more aggressively used in the FHA space, and how could we change that? And then which leads me to the last point, which is FHA is just going to be more important in our work going forward. And there are major problems with FHA in the sense that it's a relatively expensive loan, not in terms of a high cost loan, but in relationship to the conventional market, to the Fannie and Freddie loans, and particularly because of the life of loan mortgage insurance premium requirements. So as you all know, if you have mortgage insurance on a Fannie or Freddie, when the house is at 80% LTV or less, or after 7 years, you no longer have to pay the mortgage insurance. Unfortunately, that's not the case with with FHA, and those are for life of loan. But there are lots of other issues we want to pay attention to as well here, and definitely, if you've got experience with FHA, would love to hear from you about what you feel like the issues are to improve the quality of the work. We will be raising lots of issues with them, both on originations and also on servicing. And really, it's your information in the field that gives us the information to do this work. And we will convene meetings around this, but wanted to put that on your alert. And please, if you've got some immediate thoughts, shoot me an email about that as well. So good. With that, let's pivot to the main topic at hand. So it's my pleasure to have Elise Cohen with us again, and she's with the National Consumer Law Center. Elise has had a crucial role in much of the important housing legislation in this country, and has done a terrific job in helping lead a push to get the home ownership into the stimulus bill. So Elise, very much welcome. Glad you're here. It's all yours.
Thank you, Bruce and Ellie and everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. No meeting about homeownership policy in Washington would be complete without NHRC. NHRC is an essential partner for us in bringing the stories of real people, out in the country to people in Washington who may not have a real appreciation for the challenges that people face, like your clients. And so it's really an honor to be here today. I thought what I would do is sort of walk through what's happening with the stimulus with a little timeline of where we started and where we ended up, and also a couple of other things. Just as an aside, Bruce was talking about the importance of FHA. I just want to mention also that if people are working with FHA clients and they're having a hard time getting the COVID loss mitigation options, we're very interested in working with you guys on that and hearing more about what you're seeing. We're very concerned that people are being presented with resuming their regular payment through a partial claim, and they're not understanding that they have the ability to lower their payment. So on to the agenda for today. As you'll all remember, last March when the pandemic started, Congress passed the CARES Act, and it had some very helpful and very bare bones provisions providing a foreclosure moratorium and forbearance for government-backed loans. It didn't cover the third of the market that's private, although some of those companies are providing things that are similar. And at that time, people started remembering a decade ago and the hardest hit fund and how Treasury administered a fund that went to certain jurisdictions to provide cash assistance to homeowners who needed that extra money to really be able to even take advantage of the assistance that's available. And so Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island introduced the Housing Assistance Fund bill with support from Sherrod Brown, who's now the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. And the idea there is that it would go to all the states and territories, not just to certain hardest hit places. And in addition, people have been talking this whole time, where people is NHRC and all of the allies, about housing counseling funding. So there were a couple of other stimulus bills that got through with no homeownership in them. And then President Biden was elected, and he released his own proposal for an America Rescue Package on January 14th. And it didn't include any meaningful relief for homeowners. It didn't include new protections for homeowners, and it didn't include money for homeowners. Now, we all know that renters really need a lot of money, and they need that cash assistance. And our bid has been to add to that with homeownership assistance, not to compete with the rental assistance. We're all also trying to get more protections for homeowners to make sure they're not facing foreclosure right when they come out of their forbearance, to make sure they can get affordable options, whether or not they have a government-backed loan. And we'll keep working on that. But the first order of business was to figure out how we could get funding into that $1.9 trillion proposal, because really everything that was in there was already quite important. And so right after that proposal came out, before inauguration, in 24 hours, we turned around a letter to President-elect Biden asking for funding for the Housing Assistance Fund, for housing counseling, and also for these other protections. And we got almost 50 groups to sign on over a weekend in less than 24 hours. And we sent it to the White House and to our allies on the Hill to wake them up to the fact that homeownership had been excluded. And you may all find this surprising, but a major reason that homeownership was excluded is because there was an impression among many people that homeowners are fine. They can just put their missed payments at the end of the loan, end of story. They have a mortgage company to deal with, and they don't really need any other help. Now, we all know, first of all, that you can only put the payments at the end if you can resume your payments. Otherwise, you need a loan modification. And also, people are facing tax foreclosures. They're facing HOA foreclosures. They may have a manufactured home. They may have a private loan. And so there are a lot of people who still need help, even if they have a mortgage. So we sent this letter to the Biden administration on the 16th. And then on February 4th, we had a meeting with White House officials from the Domestic Policy Council and the National Economic Council. And Bruce was on that call along with me and Joseph and a lot of other people. And we did a full court press on the importance of including homeownership. And one thing that was interesting about that meeting is after we sent the letter to President-elect Biden about including homeowners in the stimulus, an industry group organized an industry letter of bankers, and they also sent a letter supporting housing counseling funding and homeowner assistance. And so they were also on that White House meeting, and we all pushed them to really think about the importance of having homeowners in the stimulus. So while that was all happening, many of us also signed on to a letter to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau recommending that the Bureau take additional actions that Congress won't be able to take to make sure homeowners aren't in foreclosure right after they get out of a forbearance, and to otherwise make things easier for struggling homeowners right now. So after the White House meeting, we did an additional letter to the Hill, and that's in one of the handouts that you have. It's the bottom one on the little box I'm looking at, Letter to Hill Homeowner Assistance. So we did that letter with all of the industry groups. We also did that in just a couple of days, and we got 350 groups to sign on to this letter that we sent on February 8th. And it was sent to the leaders of the House and the Senate, asking them to include homeownership assistance in the bill. And right around that time, the House of Representatives started working on what would be in their package, because they're doing the package, and then they're sending it over to the Senate. And we started hearing that the Housing Assistance Fund and the Housing Counseling were starting to be included by the staff in their recommendations. And the next thing we know, the draft bill that comes out of the House Financial Services Committee has the Homeowner Assistance Fund in it that it didn't start out having from the Biden administration. And so the markup was on February 10th, meaning the committee met and finalized the bill and sent it to the full House of Representatives. So we started on January 14th with the Biden proposal without any homeownership in it. And we finished this piece of it on February 10th with the Homeowner Assistance Fund and other funding for housing counseling in the proposals coming out of the House of Representatives. So that's an enormous accomplishment for all of us, because I can write a letter, but if we don't have everybody sign on to the letter, they don't really care that I want to send the letter. And so Bruce is right, it is hard to sign on to those letters quickly, and we do understand that. But it is because we are getting people from all over the country to sign these letters that we're getting the White House to pay attention to us and the Hill to prioritize this. So now it's going to be voted on by the whole House, and then it will go over to the Senate. And we're all keeping our full court press on. And we are hearing good signs from Senator Schumer's office. He's the Senate Majority Leader now, that they're hoping to keep the homeowner funding in the bill. So congratulations to everyone who's been working on this. If the money comes through, Joseph's going to talk a little bit about what the situation is and why it's so important. And I hope he'll talk a little bit about his experience of what he's seen in the past for how such funding can be used. But it can be used for utility payments, tax payments, qualifying for modification, a lot of things that your clients will need. So again, we've all achieved a lot together, and onward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Elise. Thanks also for your good work. And we'll have a chance later in the hour for Q&A if you've got questions for Elise and for Joseph and for others as well. But let's go to Joseph Sant from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. He's done important work in our field to help make our programs work more effectively. And Joseph will talk a little bit more about the impact for housing counseling and how these funds might be used.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks, Elise, for that summary. I have been so impressed over the last couple of months. I can't remember being part of an advocacy push that has had this impact this quickly, and it really is because of, as Bruce said, pivoting and quickly, catching up and joining on to the sign-on letters is really important, and the advocacy works. So hopefully we can keep it up. I'll just mention quickly, I'm from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. We're a not-for-profit based in New York that promotes and protects affordable home ownership. The remarks I'm giving today come from our experiences coordinating and funding direct services programs, including housing counseling and legal services. We also conduct policy analysis and research. And I think relevant to today's topic, we also provide direct cash and loan assistance to homeowners through our community development financial institution subsidiary called Sustainable Neighborhoods, LLC. So I'll just set a little more context about what were we looking at when we have been pushing for this homeowner assistance fund, and what are some of the uses, and how is this program, if it passes, going to impact what housing counselors do. So I'll just refresh the context that the Mortgage Bankers Association reports there's currently 3.8 million homeowners past due on their mortgages, and over half of these homeowners are people of color, according to the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey. And we also see from that survey data, Black and Hispanic mortgage holders were twice as likely as white homeowners to report being late on their mortgage. And so this is at a time when Black homeowner is as low as it was in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed. And so it is really an imperative from a racial equity standpoint that there be direct homeowner assistance available to prevent the loss of homes as we start to emerge from the pandemic. And so, as Elise mentioned, the many reasons why the CARES Act forbearance and post-forbearance safety net, while it's essential, it's not enough on its own to prevent large numbers of households from losing their homes. There may be people who don't qualify for a post-forbearance payment deferral, either because they haven't regained their income or because they're one of the homeowners, that's one of the 1/3 of mortgage holders that doesn't have a federally backed loan, and their investor may not be requiring that option be offered. But there's also a lot of threats to home retention that aren't caused by forward mortgage arrears, such as utility delinquencies, property tax and insurance payments, homeowner association dues, other things that can jeopardize the home. And so what the Homeowner Assistance Fund legislation would do, it would allocate $10 billion to a fund that would be available to provide monetary relief to homeowners with COVID-19 hardships. And it could be used for a wide range of usage. It could be used to pay down mortgage arrears. It could be used to assist with utility payments. Could be used to assist with property tax and insurance payments and homeowner association dues. So really, it's addressing a broad spectrum of risks that homeowners will face as this pandemic goes on. 60% of the funds would be prioritized to be used for people below 100% of area median income. That's according to the language as it's currently drafted. And the bill, I just would also mention, it also contains funding for HUD-approved housing counseling agencies of $100 million, which I think will be later in the panel. So I'll say a couple of things about how I think housing counseling is going to be affected and how our work is affected if this legislation passes. So the first thing is I would expect and hope that housing counselors would play a critical role in helping homeowners access these funds on a local level if and when they become available. As the patchwork of federal moratoria and in many state moratoria start to lift, as forbearances end, homeowners are going to need to resolve delinquencies. And so what I would expect is counselors are going to be able to look at both a client's loss mitigation options alongside direct assistance available through the Homeowner Assistance Fund, and figure out a strategy to address the household's needs with both of those options kind of being analyzed at the same time. So that's my hope. But our more immediate question for, I think, our community is going to be, what shape will the Homeowner Assistance Fund programs actually take? So the legislation sets some broad contours about how funds can be used, which I mentioned earlier. It sets income targeting. But beyond that, it leaves a lot of discretion to the Treasury, which will set guidelines for the program, and ultimately for the states to define the shape of the assistance that will actually roll out. So if the bill passes, the funding would flow first to the US Treasury to establish guidelines, and then pass the funds to states to distribute. So this is similar both to the hardest hit funds programs that were created in the recession, that were run out of the Treasury, but where the programs were defined by states. It's also quite similar to how COVID-19 rental relief programs are run out of the Treasury have been implemented so far and are beginning to be implemented. So it's going to be really, it's going to matter a lot what Treasury and the states implementing these programs decide the shape of the programs and the guidelines will operate. So we think it's, I think it's going to be really important that the experience of housing counselors, both with clients right now and reflecting on experiences that our organizations may have had with the hardest hit funds programs, that those influence and positively shape what Treasury does and also what each state does. My organization recently did a brief about the hardest hit funds programs, and we talked to a lot of, I'm sure a lot of folks on this call, and also a lot of administrators from that program, to draw some lessons from both positive and negative experiences with those programs. So I'll just share a few of those lessons. I think the first lesson was that we really want to avoid states setting unnecessary program eligibility and documentation requirements. So the hardest hit funds programs had a lot of trouble initially in the first couple of years of the program between 2012 and 2014, especially when states set up burdensome documentation requirements. So some states were requiring very specific documents about how to prove a hardship. Our hope would be that if that is required at all, that it's a self-certification process for homeowners. So for instance, they would just be able to certify in a letter, I've experienced a COVID-19 hardship, and that would suffice if we need to establish a rule about that at all. We would want to avoid kind of these moral hazard type of requirements that we saw in the hardest hit funds programs, where participants were disqualified if they'd done things that program administrators thought were maybe unwise, like doing a cash out refinance. Those just ended up being punitive and prevented people from accessing help when they really needed it, based on essentially moral judgment of those people. So we want to avoid that. There's a lot of other documentation requirements that I could give, but in general, we want to really make sure that's minimized at the state level, that access is made very simple and easy. The second lesson was to really increase the presence of housing counseling and legal services organizations in the implementation of the program. So we saw that programs were much more successful when they integrated housing counselors and legal services providers into the intake process and also into the outreach. It's often surprising to find that cash assistance doesn't market itself. It needs strong outreach, and housing counselors are really in touch with the client base that's needed. That these programs are going to need to get in touch with. So we think integrating counselors as much as possible into the program is critical. And again, just to harp on this public outreach, encouraging really strong awareness raising and making sure funding gets to the place it needs to get through outreach. We think that the better way to make sure assistance gets to people that need it is not to set a whole bunch of rules designed to target a very specific population. But if you're trying to help a population, reach out to them, get in touch with them, make sure that they're being offered the assistance, and that's how you get help to the communities that need it. I'll just mention in New York State, we didn't have a hardest hit fund program in our state, but we had a very similar program that was funded through the National Mortgage Settlement. And we tried to really apply the principles that I just laid out in our program, and we found it to be very successful. So our program was called the New York State MAP program. It averted over 3,000 foreclosures, preserved over $1 billion in equity, and in general, it distributed funds ahead of schedule. And it also did so while achieving a racially equitable impact. 31% of our recipients were Black homeowners in a state where Black homeowners make up 9% of the homeownership population. So I think that's really a testament to the fact that we relied on housing counselors as the intake and outreach function for our program. And that's really how we were able, in a lot of ways, to reach the people that we really felt we needed to. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to discussion and questions. Thank you.
Well, Joseph, thank you so much. And so I think we're going to go over the hour because we have a lot to do on the housing counseling part of this legislation, and we have 3 area experts on that. So we're going to take a moment here and stop for questions that have already been posted in the for Joseph and for Elise, and take those, and then we'll move to our next panel. So Ellie, have you got questions in the queue?
I do, thank you. So let's see. I just want to say that one person did say thank you to the group for the hard work. Your efforts are really appreciated. Okay, another person asks, how can we find out about how many are seriously delinquent by county, metro, and by state?
I'm going to let Joseph answer that first if he wants to.
Seriously delinquent by county, metro, and state. It's been pretty hard for us, to be honest, to look at, to parse state level data. But what we have been able to do is look at the census pulse survey, which does break down a lot of the information within a state, and then you can sometimes use that data alongside the national data sources like MBA or Black Knight to try to draw conclusions about what's going on in your state. So that would be my suggestion, is to look both at the census pulse alongside the national data. Or I'm sorry, the census pulse survey and national data.
This is Elise. I just wanted to reiterate Joseph's point about the Black Knight data, KNIGHT. They're putting out a lot of reports. And the other source of information is the Mortgage Bankers Association. They do have a quarterly delinquency report that we get. I think you have to pay for it, but I'm not sure. And sorry, I don't know the answer to that. But they put out delinquency by type of loan, like FHA, for example, versus the whole market. And they do it by state, and so you can see who's 90 days delinquent on there.
Great. Okay, can the states utilize the homeownership assistance fund monies for any other needs?
Any other needs? I mean, the idea of it is that in terms of the needs they're allowed to use it for and can use it for, it will include not just help with the mortgage directly, but these other items we were talking about, like taxes and insurance or utilities, etc. The question of how tightly the states will be monitored to make sure they're using it for the right purposes is still really an open question, and one reason why the advocacy is going to be continuing, because the current stimulus package is going to go through, as I'm sure you've heard in the news, the reconciliation process, so they only have to have 50 votes rather than 60 votes. There are a lot of very detailed rules, which I'm not an expert on, about how to include things in a reconciliation bill, which is essentially a budget bill. And so there are limits on, for example, requiring reporting. Those are the kinds of things we want to encourage the Biden-Harris administration to implement after the bill is passed, and hopefully it will be passed with this provision in it. So it will be important for you and your allies in your state to advocate for a solid setup for the program to make sure that the people who need it most are getting access to it. And I dare say that Joseph is a good resource about that.
I'd be happy to talk to anybody about our experience and what's worked and what hasn't in New York, and also connect to folks we talked to on the hardest hit funds, because we did talk to a lot of people in California and Illinois, Florida, Massachusetts. A lot of folks have a lot of lessons from their prior hardest hit funds experiences that I think it would be really good for us to draw on and share.
And Joseph, did you mention the second handout that's available?
I didn't, but yes, let me just mention the other handout that Elise mentioned was this letter to the congressional leadership, the sign-on letter. But in addition, we included this issue brief, which I think goes more to describing why do we need a homeowners assistance fund? Why is it the case that the forbearance and CARES Act measures are inadequate to prevent wide-scale loss of homes? And so that's what you'll see in that issue brief.
And I'll add, for anybody who, for whatever reason, can't download those documents that are available in the webinar toolbox, there will be an email that will go out to the Leaders in Housing Counseling listserv with the recording of this session, and those two documents will be available in that email as well. Okay, on to the next question. Will any of these programs help small landlords who are at risk for foreclosure, which will impact renters?
I could take that one, Elise, if you want. I think
Sure.
The answer is hopefully yes. If this bill passes, and you're a owner, the bill doesn't exclude providing assistance to an owner. You could potentially be eligible if it's a primary residence and it's a 1 to 4 unit building. So as currently drafted, I think yes.
And there's also a separate provision for rental assistance, and I'm not an expert on that, but people are paying attention to small landlords.
Great. Okay, somebody is just agreeing that as much as possible to have a self-certification for COVID hardship, because the current CARES funding for rent they need proof and it can be very difficult to get it. Just a comment. Okay, would the client have to be past due for the funds, to be eligible for the funds?
Joseph, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think under the statute as drafted, the assistance could be used for mortgage payment assistance, for mortgages, utilities, internet service, property taxes. So the intention, I think, is to help prevent, address a risk of eviction or foreclosure, as the bill states it. So as currently drafted, is it required that you show a delinquency? Not specifically. I think that's the intent. And I think what I would want to look at is what are the guidelines that Treasury is going to release, and what are the guidelines that states would then layer on top of that to target assistance. So that's probably a little bit of an unsatisfying answer, but I think we would have to wait and see what the specific guidance says about that.
I mean, I would just jump in on an area that I think that many experts on this call about, and that is that in the hardest hit funds, many states had way too many layers, and Joseph referred to this, but and they were much too targeted, and lots of documentation requirements that meant that people got knocked out of the program, and lots of people got knocked out of the program. I mean, I just recall Florida had a 97% rejection rate. So in one of the worst states in the country. I mean, it's just shocking. And so part of what this conversation is about is, what guidance do we give to Treasury to say, these are the kind of guidelines that we think will work well, and these are the things to avoid. That really gives us a much greater ability to help our clients.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions again about the data. So one person asks that you repeat where you can find the state level information, and another person asks where you can find the national data.
So I'll start with national data. The sources that we've been relying on are Black Knight and the Mortgage Bankers Association data sources.
Joseph, are those free and available to the public? Can you just tell people how you're finding it?
Most of that is publicly available. Some of the MBA data needs to be, you need to pay for it to get the underlying data. But the MBA does publish pretty good, at least high-level national data that should be free to the public. So you can get that on their website. Same with Black Knight. They publish these reports that you can download and have pretty good information. In terms of state data, I think what I was trying to explain earlier is the Census Pulse survey data does provide information about what people within states are saying and about their mortgage delinquency, and so it's self-reported information that can give you a sense of percentages, who's struggling, and especially it's helpful at the racial demographic level. But it is generally seen as more reliable to look at the Mortgage Bankers Association and Black Knight data for just raw numbers of people who are delinquent. So when you put this census data together with that national data, you can draw conclusions or make estimates about what's going on in your state if you don't have the raw count of mortgage delinquencies within your state. So I hope that's helpful. If it isn't, please reach out and I would be glad to connect you to our our data team, and they can help you with that.
So one person is asking about kind of referral lines similar to what currently exists in New York State, and there's also one in Washington State. And if there is any flexibility within the homeowner assistance fund to support some kind of like hotline for homeowners to find out information about housing counseling and legal services and so on.
Well, just with a big moment of silence, I'm not sure that we know or understand that. It is a good point, and there's been a lot of discussion about how to have a more robust communication world, both reaching the public and then the public being able to go and reach housing counseling. I don't think we've solved that problem, but it's definitely part of the conversation. There may be other funding that we're encouraging for housing counseling, and it might be that some of that might be embedded in that. So it's to be determined that we don't have anything in place right now.
Okay, I did just put into the chat box a link to the Philadelphia Fed that somebody suggested might be helpful in getting delinquency rates by metro area. So that is in the chat box if people are interested in that. Also, somebody's asking for, I think maybe this is more related to landlords in the follow-up question to the question about whether landlords would be able to be assisted. The follow-up is, what if it isn't their principal residence? What if it's an investment property? And maybe that's another, we aren't sure of the details of those kinds of aspects of the funding yet.
Well, I would say, this is Elise, that this is definitely not my area of expertise, and that the National Housing Law Project and the National Low Income Housing Coalition are focused on those questions and may have answers. Joseph may have a specific answer about the bill, but I just wanted to flag that larger answer.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. And yeah, rather than wade into the bill text, which I think is, again, the answer is going to be, it may depend on what the overlay Treasury sets on it. I think it's remains to be seen and needs some follow-up.
I mean, basically, we're trying to focus on people living in their own homes. And there's a whole separate structure of people who are focused on what, landlords and renters themselves should be getting for assistance. And there has been a steady stream of rental assistance, and we expect that to continue.
Okay, somebody asks if there's any protection for family survivors of mortgage holders who died or have become seriously ill due to COVID-19.
Well, whether or not that's true about someone, they could still be eligible for the assistance. There may be additional CARES Act funding that I don't know about, but it doesn't, it would give you a good reason for a COVID-related hardship. You might also have a COVID-related hardship because you lost your job. Joseph, I don't know if you have more specifics there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, I think one of the things we would want to make sure Treasury and the states are looking at is a lot of folks in the hardest hit funds programs had trouble documenting ownership in situations like that. And so that was one of the pieces of feedback that I think would be important to share about how do you establish ownership in these sort of non-straightforward ways. You try to make it as easy as possible, not require unnecessary sort of extra probating of the will, of the deed and property. There are some states that have simpler ways to show that. So we would definitely want to look at that. That was one of the ways in which people really struggled to access funds during the recession.
I do want to mention one other thing. Thank you, Joseph, which is the federal mortgage servicing rules from the CFPB and also some of the specific rules from, say, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac or FHA specifically deal with surviving spouses and similar situations. Some of the rules are better than others, but people who, may not be on the loan, but are an owner of the home, have a variety of rights if they can show that they're the successor. And they shouldn't necessarily have to go through probate, for example, to do that. And so National Consumer Law Center provides technical assistance on that issue. There may also be legal services lawyers in your community, like Joseph, who might be able to help you with thorny situations like that.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question for both of you. And I just want everybody to understand, if you asked a question and it didn't get answered, Joseph and Elise have to drop off of our call at 2 o'clock and aren't able to stay after. So I will be sending them any questions that didn't get answered today. And then we'll send those out via the Leaders and Housing Counseling listserv once they're all answered. So the final question is, it's another follow-up, but somebody mentioned that in Arizona, the hardest hit funds were used to balance the budget. Will that be possible with this homeowner assistance fund as well?
I'm going to let Joseph answer that.
I certainly hope not. The way the bill is drafted, I think, does a decent job of making sure that the allowable uses of the fund are limited to what we've been describing, paying for mortgage payments, insurance costs, utility, and tax arrears. And there isn't a sort of catch-all to just plug budget holes. That doesn't mean don't be wary and watch, what your state is doing. Absolutely do that, but hopefully the possibility for that kind of action is limited. There is one provision that allows a state to reimburse itself if it had previously run COVID assistance programs. So I would just point that out, but that's not a license to use the funding for whatever the state wants. So be vigilant, but I think there's reason to think it might not be permissible to do that.
Great, thank you both. And I'm going to hand it back to Bruce.
Excellent. So we're going to quickly, so we're going to go over the hour and we're going to change the order a tiny bit so that I know Lot has to leave. So I'm going to have Lot go first and then Lori and then Chris. So Lot Diaz, well-known voice in our community at the Unidos US, and has had deep experience with the NFMC project. Lot, give us your thoughts.
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. I apologize. It's a day of COVID. It's Zoom calls one after another sometimes. Hi, my name is Lot Diaz. I work with Unidos US. We are a national organization who work with partners in local communities across the country, working in advocacy and program work, and have been a national intermediary with HUD since the late 90s. So we've been involved with HUD Housing Council for a long period of time. The NFMC program, I'm gonna quickly tick off things that we liked and things we didn't like. And for those who worked NFMC, National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program, know it was supported counselors serving families in foreclosure. It was a national program operating over a number of years, eight or so, and provided probably over $200 million in housing counseling funding over that period. So it was a major program for housing counselors. The limitations, I'd say, it's geographic targeting, partly because of legislation. If families weren't in that that area, you couldn't bill for them. And our groups many times had trouble meeting that if they're in an atypical area that was not easily captured through the targeting process. Reporting was daunting. Again, I think that was driven in part by the legislation. It was daunting. The upside is that it provided a lot of data for the industry to kind of reflect the impact of the work being done in the field. So it's a two-edged sword. Reporting data is both time-consuming, but it also can be used for the good of communicating the good works that we do. It was structured in a fee-for-service model, had generally used 2 levels, which we thought was really effective. It helped us organize some of the work that we did. So we think that is some model structure that, if continued, would not be bad. They did a lot of programmatic monitoring. The interesting thing about their system as well, the reporting system per se, was less about submitting client reports and more about hitting service thresholds. So if you had 100 clients at 15%, you'd get a payment. At 35%, you'd get a payment. At 55%. So rather than a monthly report, quarterly report, you reported as you hit service level thresholds, which again, we thought was a pretty effective system within the networks that we were using. And so those are things that the geo-targeting may be one we want to avoid to the degree that it could possibly can, but the reporting should be minimized to the degree just what we need to let the federal government know what we're doing, but not more. And then their general structure of fee-for-service levels was not, for us, was a good way to organize the work. The one thing I will say about this one, the new program, it's going to allow rental counseling and pre-purchase counseling, as well as any other form of homeless counseling for those of you who do that. And so there's going to be some design work. If they keep a similar structure, that design work has to be done. And I think there's ways to do all that. My last point is 2 last points. One is that we had initially a lot of trouble with, because of both federal sources, double dipping. The double dipping rule was always an issue, and it was an issue up until almost the last grant, where HUD removed that provision, that a strict provision you can't cross. If you do NFMC client, charge for a client, you can't charge for your HUD comprehensive housing council grant. It can be a difficult situation, so I think we should pay close attention to how that rule is going to come across. And then lastly, just on, I think when I was talking to Chris and Lori earlier, I think we both agreed to get a few voices in the final program design representing the broad spectrum of organizations that are going to be using it. So I would, to the degree that we can communicate that to NeighborWorks, I think that would be helpful as well. Bruce, with that, I'll kind of pass it on to Chris and Lori.
Excellent. No, I think that's perfect. And just as quick context, I apologize for not saying this earlier, but so $100 million are in the proposed stimulus bill right now. And we've structured it so that it would go through NeighborWorks, which of course is how the NFMC program worked. And so they're at the threshold of, assuming this all goes through, of having to design a program. And that's sort of the context. But boy, that was excellent. A lot reminded me of a few traumas from that time. So thanks for that. So let's go to Lori Gay, who's been in the field a long time, doing great work at NHS of Los Angeles, one of the high producing agencies in the NFMC world. Lori, interested to hear what you say.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate being here. And thanks a lot for all those comments and the prior panelists too. I think some context that's different this time. The foreclosure crisis kind of seemed to be thrust upon us the last time. And there were some of us who had been studying it, but we were studying it in our local neighborhoods. And we were studying it with a race and equity lens focused around predatory lending. And we had no clue about the rest of the world. And outside of LA. So pretty Pollyanna, but it was just who we were at the time. And we had noted that Blacks were losing their homes at 7 times the rate of white families in South Los Angeles neighborhoods. And so we were all over that. And then the crisis hit the whole country, and we realized it was much bigger, right? So our response pre-NFMC even was to have our whole staff pivot toward foreclosure response. And we did that from the receptionist to my office. All of us could do a level 1 intake. We were running events 4 nights a week and large scale events on the weekends. And so we became one of the larger responders nationally and stayed in that space for, I'd say, about 3 to 4 years. And then NSP hit, Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and we pivoted into that. And by that time, the hardest hit funds were active. We saw them in California as not being effective. New rules, new drama, not reaching communities of color. So we didn't participate in a high way in that at all. And so I was grateful to hear some of the comments earlier, you know, from Joseph about just things that need to change and things that are impactful. Some of the stuff we would recommend seeing this new effort in a pandemic where we've had some time, you know, we've been in a lull. And I think it's critical that we prep and present, right? We stand forward, we jump into the fray with strategy, efficiency, much more experienced counselors now who have to get certified, you know, and get a real estate and series 6 or 7 license to be counselors. You know, we're ready, we're better than we were before. And we have just a second, you know, to breathe, position, and then when they call, say, put me in, coach. And I think we've got to keep that perspective throughout, and it'll be a phenomenal presentation. We talked earlier, and I said something that I hope to say more often. We're being asked to be the nation's financial coach. And we don't need to be people who are ashamed of that or who are not ready to, you know, do that work. And we need to be paid for it. That's a big deal. NFMC in the past did not pay well, and we all had to fundraise to put the program on. It makes no sense. Chris Kramer will talk, I'm sure, when he speaks about full recovery, making sure that we get all the costs back that it costs us. And that was a huge deal. We need to be concerned about the data pool. We went from over 200 data points potentially at the beginning as we were helping design NFMC to, Bruce told me today it was 40 something data points. I still had 60 something in my mind, but that gives you a sense of just, it's all too much. We've got to streamline the data call, make it efficient. A lot of us are on Salesforce now and other kinds of platforms that are reasonable. So it's, what do we really need to collect from our people who we want to highlight? Families are in real trauma this time. They're in trouble. It's worse than before because we've been quarantined, a number of us, all over the country. And people they're in a very weird emotional space, and rightfully so. And then if you then want to talk about foreclosure or tenant evictions or whatever, it's going to be overwhelming. So we need support for counselors as well, and for our clients. And I want us to think about it like PTSD, right? But that it's, I don't know what you'd reframe it as. It's not post-trauma, we're in the trauma. And so the mental health providers, the legal service providers, in language folks who can translate for us quickly and fastly, you know, fraud prevention, scam prevention, all those kind of collaborators are really needed this time. And I think we'll do well and be well if we don't approach it as we're a standalone, but it's a team. And this team needs to be available to America, the land we love, right now, to care for people. And I think that presentation will help us. Last, I'll say we'll press in on things with NeighborWorks, since we're network members, relative to encouraging corporate America to be a part of this, so that there's enough funding there for you to do a great job. And we're creating some data pools. I love that prior discussion on data. around the homeowner vulnerabilities by neighborhoods. So we've teamed up with UCLA, and we're studying everything from the pulse survey to foreclosure data to delinquency. It's crazy. And then we've created this index that we'll share with Bruce and his team, so he has it, and maybe we can replicate that kind of thing, Bruce, nationwide. But I think it will be exciting, sad but exciting to see what's plausible, right? And what's going on with people for real, people of color being at the top of the group, and keep this race equity lens in our discussions, because it's many of the people we're serving. But that in the end, the housing counseling industry is strong, ready, and able to perform and do a phenomenal job. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, so much. And I completely agree that we are a lot more sophisticated, both technologically and skill-wise, going into this disaster. I mean, we're going to need to grow staff. There's no question that that was a huge challenge in the NFMC and more challenging in the current environment with certification. But I think lots of us are working on trying to solve those problems. And a key issue is simply we need to have the funding in place, and this will be part of that. So let's turn to Chris Kramer, veteran voice in our work and deeply influential during the foreclosure crisis and other issues over the years. Chris, give us your insights.
Thank you, Bruce. Great to be here, and always great to be with my good friend Lori Gay. Beyond Housing operates in St. Louis, Missouri, and we're a comprehensive community development organization that does financial advisement services all across the spectrum, from first-time home ownership to rental to foreclosure. But we also own 500 plus units of affordable rental housing. And we've developed and own a grocery store, a movie theater, a health facility, two different strip malls, and have staff embedded in our local schools, community health workers on staff, and a variety of other different, community-driven activities, as our name implies. We do housing and then a few other things. As Lori said, as a field, the foreclosure crisis caught us flat-footed, and we had to gear everything up and jumpstart systems and try to create opportunities to support families and keep them in their homes and keep neighborhoods as stable as possible. And that was absolutely trial by fire. And I think we learned a lot. We built some strong muscles. We figured out what works, what doesn't work. We figured out how to work with NeighborWorks on a national level to, again, create this funding mechanism that, again, keeps our friends at the federal government happy from a compliance standpoint, but tries to find ways that we can be innovative and efficient in, again, providing services and keeping families in their homes. So we can build on that, but as Lori said, and I'm really going to affirm a lot of what Lori said, from a system standpoint, simplify it as best we can. We know there's hoops to jump through because it's federal money, but let's make sure we're having a conversation about what's needed and what's truly needed, and let's make sure we make it as easy for families that are struggling, to not make it so laborious and painful and difficult for families that are struggling mightily to begin with. So it's getting work real hard with NeighborWorks and others to simplify the data that's required to, again, certainly be compliant with what the feds need, but again, recognize that we want to do this quickly, efficiently, stabilize families, and get them positioned for long-term success. I can't reiterate the idea of trauma and what families are going through, and then what our frontline staff go through, and day in, day out, helping folks through just really difficult and challenging situations. So be connected with the mental health community wherever your organizations are located, and not only the mental health community, but realize that as everyone knows, that the other needs that exist for families aren't just simply the financial needs from the housing situation. If they have those kinds of needs, and they have other cascading needs. So again, how do we make sure we're building up networks in our local communities to get families that reach out because there are resources to get them caught up and get them stabilized, that they have other needs as well. And if we could be able to provide those, link families to those important services, that's going to do them absolutely fantastic support and help along the way. So we're, again, big advocates for connectivity of not only your services, but others in your region. two other kind of quick final points, and Lori alluded to this. This industry never gets paid the way it should get paid. We're always the stepchild. We're always, out there begging with our tin cups. But for us and the work that our great staff accomplishes all across this country, so many families would be struggling, and so many private enterprises that make money off of the families that use their products. That everyone else gets paid except us, and we're forever begging and pleading for a few more alms for the poor. We should get paid. We should be recognized as a partner in the process, as a significant and important partner in ensuring that not only our families stable and neighborhoods stay stable, but the banking industry, the lending industry, the real estate industry stands up and stays strong, and we should get paid for that. So the idea of full cost recovery is simply, what does it cost us to do this? The true, again, direct cost and indirect costs, right? Admin and overhead are real things in real businesses, so we should get reimbursed for that. And also recognize, as everyone knows, that some cases are extremely complicated and take a long, long time, and the costs for them far exceed any minimums that are out there. Also recognize that some cases are a little more straightforward and we can handle pretty quickly. So again, press folks like at NeighborWorks to think about full cost recovery. We should be bold, we should be aggressive. We should tell people what we do is as valuable as anything else in this system, and everybody else gets paid. And we have to be standing out with our tin cup begging for more help. And we should press real hard not to be in that position. And again, espouse the importance of what we do, the great sophistication we've garnered over the years, and the great passionate staff that we have to deliver these services day in and day out. And I'll stop there, and so folks can ask some questions, and I'll let Lori answer all of them because she's smarter than I am.
Well, thank you. That was very inspirational and really on target. Ellie, do we have some questions? Can we take a few?
We do. We have some thoughts and we have some questions. Well, somebody asked how much of the 10 billion will trickle down to housing counseling, and I think we talked about that. Bruce answered that. It's actually 100 million separate from the 10 billion.
Right.
Let's see. Okay, so somebody did ask about if the money is running through NeighborWorks, how does an agency that doesn't use NeighborWorks as their intermediary access the funding? I did quickly answer that the requirement only be that you are a HUD-approved organization, and that we don't have details yet about how exactly it will be distributed. And that's one of the reasons we're having this conversation. But I open it to you, Bruce, if there's something more that we do already know about that.
Well, that's perfect. The legislation does have a cap of 15% of all the funds can, no more than 15% can go to NeighborWorks organizations, which given their size and scale actually probably limits them some. So yeah, there are 85% of the funds at least have to go. And during the NFMC program, I know they were very conscious of that and didn't even get close to the 15% cap. So it's definitely a valid issue to raise, and I think this one's taken care of.
Great. Somebody suggests that it would be a great idea for the state agencies and the counseling agencies to handle future possible hardest hit funds, since they're trained, they have the software, and all that would change is the criteria. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that.
And they're asking, should the agency run the program for the HFA? Am I understanding the question correctly?
It's not a question, it's just a comment.
I would say not all HFAs are created equal.
No, boy, is that true. So, actually some of them were completely overwhelmed by the hardest hit funds and really had a hard time getting up to speed. At the end of the day, it's really has to do with, do you have scale and do you have a relationship with the people who run the hardest hit fund in your state legislature? And this might be a contractual something as a solution, but that's really a local issue.
Somebody did mention that they think that it is they really appreciate that there is the interest in making sure that housing counseling is paired with direct assistance to leverage the loss mitigation and provide the counselor support with finding a comprehensive solution. Their recent CARES Act funded direct assistance. It was direct assistance only and left many homeowners still struggling. Just a comment that somebody's making. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that.
Well, I think certainly, you know, Ellie, what we saw out here in the West was that there wasn't a focus on homeowners. The thinking was homeowners are covered, right? They're okay. And then we started running the data in front of people of how in LA County, more than 60% of the loans that were made were with privately held lenders who in many cases look like predators. So I don't know distinctions in other parts of the country, but for us, Bank of America wasn't a primary lead, right? In the top 5 lenders, 3 of them were private mortgage companies. So I think that kind of stuff will leave homeowners vulnerable. So we want to just be careful. We've been a loud voice in our space about that. And we're going to manage a mortgage relief fund for our county starting, I hope, next month and get going, you know, because there's a bunch of people who are suffering in silence. We used to talk like that during the last crisis. And when you see how many people who did get forbearances, who renewed them, I think the number was like 80%. People are having trouble. And so we want to be real careful to not presume that it's only the small mom and pop landlord. I'm so grateful they've been included this time, but the single family detached kind of homeowner or somebody who owns a condo, whatever, they need help too.
Okay. I'm sorry, there's things popping in now as we're talking, and I'm just trying to take a look to make sure. What are going to be the eligibility for housing counseling? Meaning, what do you need to show to get some of the funds? I don't know if we know this specifically.
Okay, there's two buckets of funds. So one bucket is the Homeowners Assistance Fund. That will flow independently of us through the Treasury to the Housing Finance Agency. And they will have a distribution program. In terms of the housing counseling funding, there are it would be like NFMC. I mean, NeighborWorks will put up a concept of how groups can access it. What are the criteria about who can access it? And we're guessing that'll be HUD approved housing counseling agencies. And then what will be the criteria? One thing that we'll recommend, which we thought was really good about how NeighborWorks did this with NFMC, was that while it's a fee-for-service program, you run some of the payments at the beginning so that groups don't have to work really hard to get to the first threshold to get a check, but in fact have seed money so they can invest in hiring up staff and equipment and whatever technology improvements they need to do to provide the reporting. So that gives you, so NeighborWorks comes from our culture. Marietta Rodriguez, the CEO, was a housing counselor. I mean, they do have some deep understanding of this, so I think it's up to us to figure out what more to tell them. But part of it will be, I hope, that groups get some seed money up front to make it easier for you to get started.
Okay, so there's two more things that I'm gonna throw out there. One of them is just there's a couple of different questions related to when we think this is going to get voted on and when we think it's going to become available. And then another person is mentioning that NeighborWorks is doing some sort of survey, and they're wondering if it has something to do maybe with the 100 million, because they're surveying to find out a range of what funding would need to be for an organization. So I don't know if anybody knows anything about that survey or about the timeline for the vote.
So I do know about the timeline. So the Biden-Harris administration aren't really driving this. It's their legislation. We have had a really excellent working relationship, especially with Maxine Waters' staff, the House Financial Services Committee in the House, and with Sherrod Brown and Bob Menendez's staff in the Senate. It's been voted out of committee by, I think, a pretty much a party line vote by the Democrats. And then it needs to get to the House floor. I've heard it could be as early as next week, but there's lots of things in the way. Fortunately, the impeachment trial is not one of them, but so we don't know the exact timing. It has to be voted there, then it goes to the Senate, it goes to Senate banking, and where it will get voted on as well. A critical question is, will they make any changes to the bill? And that will slow it up, because then it means that it has to pass the Senate and then get repassed in the House. One of the really good things about this has been that the House and Senate have really worked together to write this, or House and Senate Democrats have really worked together to write this bill so that there's kind of broad agreement. Hopefully that it sails through the Democratic side of the Senate, but it's not guaranteed. Then it goes to the Senate floor, and then it goes to the president's desk. The president is highly motivated to sign it. They are aiming to try to get this passed by mid-March, because it includes in there some unemployment assistance, and the current unemployment assistance component comes to an end mid-March. So the idea is that they want to not have people miss a month, so that's, you know, congratulate, or don't want them to even miss a week. So congratulations to them for being that self-conscious. It is a second and big question about how soon the programs can start, because they have to be designed and approved at Treasury and at NeighborWorks, and then they've got to be implemented, rolled out. We've got to be trained on them, and the housing finance agencies need to do their piece of the homeowners assistance. So that, you know, that will take some time, and I can't tell you how long that will take. You know, I think the good news is that both Treasury and NeighborWorks are very aware of this, thinking about these questions. And then and that's why we're having this call now. There was a question about, should we wait on doing this call until the bill is passed and is law? And good question, but our feeling was, let's get this stuff on the table now so that we can get it to them. So hopefully their program design is informed by what we say today. So.
And then the other comment about it, seems as though NeighborWorks is doing some kind of survey of groups. Is anybody aware of that? Any, Chris or Lori, are you aware of that?
I've not gotten a survey request.
Me either.
I should just say that there is an HPN collaborative around fee-for-service payments, and which Lot had a big role in designing. I had some role, a bunch of organizations did, and NeighborWorks is very much part of that. It's a possibility that that's the survey, it's the same survey, and that in that case it's coincidental, but I really don't know. I really don't know.
Yes, that makes total sense, Bruce.
It makes total sense, but I don't know.
No, it makes total sense that it is that's the survey.
Got it.
So that's pretty much it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this from all of you, and thanks, Chris and Lori. Quick shout out to having people join NHRC, organization membership dues, really give us the flexibility to do lobbying and do the stuff that helps. I mean, we had a major role in getting this $100 million housing counseling funding, and we worked very closely starting in March with staff, with Sherrod Brown's staff, Bob Menendez's staff, and absolutely with Maxine Waters' staff. This is what we exist to do, and we really want to keep doing it. There's tons of other advocacy we're going to do. We think there's lots of possibilities. The new Biden administration and the new voices at HUD. So I think we're going to be able to help strengthen our work, and your membership is a part of that. So thank you very much for all the support everybody has shown. Really appreciate that without being prompted, a number of groups have renewed their membership dues this year already. And we just, please keep it coming. We need your support. And then finally, we'll just say that we're going to have a call in March 4th, and we're going to do a deep dive on student loan servicing and what are the best options for your clients in today's context. Some things have changed some, and also probably there'll be some talk about the advocacy piece as well. We'll have Savvy, which is that service that does that can help people figure out online which piece of the student loan repayment plans and public service options which apply to them, and which ones are the best options. It's really a very useful program. You get a discount if you're a member for the paid part, but a lot of it is free, and you can just use the free part to help your clients figure out what they need. There's a lot of value in the paid part as well. But we'll talk about that, and I'm hoping we'll have the student debt crisis people there as well. They've done the trainings with us in the past on student loans, and we'll do an update on that. So with that quick note, we're going to close out the call. Thanks, Ellie, for managing it and putting it together. And we will talk with you in March.